Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to announce that after 15 months of basically nothing happening, Adventure Lookup is live. You can go to it right now, www.adventurelookup.com. Of course, there's a link in the doobly-doo. It's already got like 260 some odd adventures in it. It's got popular adventures in it. It's got obscure adventures in it. We need your help to populate it, and that's what this video is going to be about. It's going to be about the birth of adventurelookup.com. This is something I've wanted for a long time, and once I had a YouTube channel with a substantive number of subscribers, I think it was like 20 or 30,000 subscribers, I said, hey, is there some way we can do this like an open source project? And after a long time of basically nothing happening, it has finally exploded and taken off, and it's working. Largely thanks to a guy in Germany named Christian and a guy named Robert. Between the two of them, they did a lot of database programming and writing. There's somebody else working on a better looking front end. There are lots of folks who've been helping with this, including my friend Jerry, who's basically acting as kind of the admin of the database. And Jerry is the producer of our stream, without whom none of this stuff would be happening. Those guys put a tremendous amount of work into this thing. It's an ongoing process, like I said, but it is certainly usable now. It is basically stable. Of course, I say that by the time you get there, it may have crashed because who knows where this is the first time thousands of people are going to be pounding on it. But I want to make a video talking about what Adventure Lookup is and how it works and how I hope it will evolve moving forward. That's the subject of this video. I have long wanted, I said in the earlier video last week that since like 1997, when the internet first kind of exploded with forums and stuff like that, I've been watching dungeon masters go online and say, listen, this is where my characters are. They're about to cross the ocean, and it would be cool if there was some encounter or adventure set on a ship, or I'm going to run an adventure that is going to, or campaign that's going to be set in a city. The entire campaign is going to be set in a city. It would be, give me a list of all the cool, good city adventures. This happens all the time. And the thing about D&D is if you are someone who makes your own adventures from scratch, my hat goes off to you, because it's a lot of work, but it's very creative and can be a very rewarding thing, and you will eventually become a really good adventure designer. But if you're somebody like me, you don't have a lot of time to craft a bespoke adventure every time you play. It's much easier to go online and go grab an adventure that someone else put a lot of work and effort into and just tweak the stuff to make that you don't like to make it yours. Like, I'm not an artist, I'm not a cartographer, so it's great, especially adventures that have great tactical maps and stuff like that, or great dungeon design. It's like, this would have taken me hours to do, but it only took me minutes to read it and understand it. They've been making adventures for Dungeons and Dragons for literally 40 years. I think 1976 was the first adventure. It's called like Palace of the Vampire Queen or something like that. It was published by a third-party company for Dungeons and Dragons. The first official adventure, G1, Steading of the Hill Giant Jarl, the first in the Against the Giant series, came out in 1978. And since then, there's been an unending flood of adventure content into the market. Whatever you're looking for, wherever you are in your campaign, there is an adventure ready for you. You just need to find it, and that's what Adventure Lookup is for. Whenever I talk about this, people say, well, isn't that basically what the DMs Guild is? And that's what this video is going to be about, is explaining what Adventure Lookup is and what it is not. The DMs Guild is a website where you can go and buy adventures, but the tools for searching through those adventures to find the thing you're looking for are actually kind of primitive. I think you can filter based on who the publisher is. You can filter, I think, based on stuff like level, low level. You can filter based on stuff like what edition of D&D you want for. Adventure Lookup does all that stuff, but Adventure Lookup does a lot more, and it includes, ideally it would be great if it would someday include every adventure ever. The DMs Guild is just for stuff that's currently available for download via PDF. But Adventure Lookup can do tons of stuff that DMs Guild can't. For instance, you can search Adventure Lookup for show me adventures that have a beholder as the main villain, or show me adventures that have the hand and eye of Vecna in them as items. And stuff like show me adventures set on a ship. There's not really a way to do that on the DMs Guild. And also, Adventure Lookup is meant to be a catalog of all adventures ever published for D&D. D&D and all of its clones and offshoots, including all of the old school Renaissance stuff like Labyrinth Lord, including stuff like Pathfinder, because it's my conviction that all of these adventures for all these different systems are relatively easy and straightforward to convert into 5th edition or whatever edition is your favorite. I think the only exception is 4th edition. 4th edition is a little weirder than the others, but it can still be done. The plots and maps and characters and stuff like that are still totally useful. That's what Adventure Lookup is for. You search based on whatever criteria you want, and it will give you a list of adventures that will do what you're looking for. And it's not, you can't buy the adventures from Adventure Lookup. It is literally just like an index, but it's meant to be a living index that grows over time. And like I said, wouldn't it be great if it included every adventure ever? That's possible. It may do that someday. It will reference adventures that are currently out of print, that there is no way you can't go to the DMs Guild and get them. But at least now you know the adventure exists, and it should be, I think you will find it is relatively easy for you to get your hands on, even adventures that have been long out of print. Although I will tell you this, each of these entries has a place where you can click on a link to get the adventure. But this is part of making this video, is any links that people post to like torrent sites or anything like that, we're just going to take down. We're not here to promote piracy or anything like that. It's up to you to get your hands on these adventures. But if there is a place where you can download the adventure legally, including places like the DMs Guild or Paizo.com, that link will be there. So many of these adventures are currently available. You can search for it in Adventure Lookup and click on it, and it'll take you to the website that has that adventure in it. And a lot of people who write their own adventures have started putting their stuff into Adventure Lookup, which is awesome. Adventure Lookup already has over 260 adventures in it, but that's a tiny fraction of the total number of adventures out there. And some of the adventures that are in there, I think, aren't completely detailed, and some of them have been entered by people who didn't really understand what all the fields are for. So that's what this video is going to be about. We need volunteers. We need people. Anybody can go on to Adventure Lookup. I think there are different levels of user. You can just be somebody who looks stuff up. You can be somebody who helps submit stuff. You can be a curator. A curator is somebody who can go through submissions and fix them and tweak them. Or you can be an admin, which we probably need more of. It'll be up to people like me and Jerry and Christian and Robert to identify those folks who have been, good submitters and promote them to curators, and good curators and promote them to admins. It's going to be just like moderating it into the forum. But we need you to help us populate this database with adventures. So go, if you have the time and the inclination. Remember that every dungeon master everywhere has the opportunity to benefit from this. So this, and we don't make any money off of this. I think we may start using affiliate links or something like that. We may turn on Google AdSense or something, because we've got to pay for the server space. Jerry is hosting all of this stuff just totally out of pocket. And Adventure Lookup, it might bomb. Maybe nobody will use it.Maybe it's a bad idea, but it might actually become really useful tool, and people will be using it for years to come, in which case somebody's got to pay for it. And I have no problem, by the way, with ads. Even though I say I don't run any ads in front of my stuff, I have no problem with ads if they are ads I think the people watching the channel would be interested in. I remember like gaming paper, which I use all the time. My friend Phil drew a whole encounter the other night on some of my gaming paper, which was fantastic. I'm a huge fan of gaming paper. I use their stuff all the time, and they have their own tiles now and stuff. I found gaming paper based on a targeted ad on a website, and I'm like, it's one of the few times I've ever actually clicked on an ad, because it turned out it was something I was actually looking for. So I have no problem with ads as long as they are things that the people heading to Adventure Lookup are going to want to click on. I don't know if Google AdSense is good for that or not, but who knows? We'll find out. That's not the point. The point is the ads are going to be off on the side. They'll be unobtrusive. It's never going to be crazy. And right now it has no ads. It's not generating any revenue. The goal isn't make money off this. That's ridiculous. The goal is, if it generates any revenue, it's going to be paying for the server space. So we need folks to help us enter adventures, and that's what the rest of this video is going to be about. It's going to be how to be a good Adventure Lookup submitter. If you want to help the database, please let us know. There's a GitHub. I'll link to the GitHub, and you can create issues. People who find bugs can submit bugs via the GitHub, and maybe we'll grow the list of people working on it, so it's not just Christian and Robert doing all the work. But there is a tendency among the people who have already submitted adventures to do one of two things, and I want to kind of push them toward the middle. They either only list like a handful of data points in a given adventure, which means a lot more work still needs to be done, or they list absolutely everything in the adventure, every little detail, and neither of these are really what we're looking for. Adventure Lookup is not intended to be an encyclopedia where you can find every single detail of an adventure, like every NPC in the Temple of Elemental Evil. It's more like a catalog, right? A catalog, it lists the cool bullet points that's going to help somebody find something or help somebody buy something, but it doesn't list every noodly part or every noodly detail about the product. And it's all about how people search. So that's what we're going to talk about moving forward. We're going to go field by field and talk about what the legal entries are for any given field in Adventure Lookup and what the goal is moving forward. And you who watch this video and learn, oh, that's how it's supposed to work. Oh, I get it. You can go through other entries and go, that's not, Matt said it's not supposed to be like this. It's supposed to be like this, and flag that record, flag that adventure and say, hey, someone needs to fix this. That's something a normal user can do, and then a curator can go through and fix it. You can sort by publisher, and there's a whole list of publishers, and that list may grow, but really I think the things people look for when they're looking for a list of publishers is they tend to be searching for official stuff, or they don't care. because there is this assumption that the official stuff is somehow better. I think that is often true. It's not always true, obviously. And that Adventure Lookup lets you do that. You can say only show me stuff that TSR published or Wizards of the Coast published or Paizo published. But you may discover that an adventure you found via adventurelookup.com was really cool. And you thought, well, I want to search for all adventures written by this author or all adventures done by this publisher. And so you can do that. Setting, you can filter by setting. Setting's pretty obvious, but people want to throw in lots of crazy settings. This is a good place to start when it comes to what's the proper use of Adventure Lookup. You may have your own homebrew setting, and you may have written an adventure for it and published it on the DMs Guild, but nobody out there is searching for that setting. People are searching for the big settings, right? And what I want to make sure is that when somebody comes to Adventure Lookup and they click on something like, I want to filter, I want to look for all the Ravenloft adventures, for instance, that they don't end up seeing this huge, massive list with a whole bunch of settings they've never heard of because everyone's taken their homebrew obscure setting and dumped it into Adventure Lookup. The goal isn't make a list of everything. The goal is make it easy for people who are searching for stuff. And people who are searching for stuff are looking for the big settings that are popular because they're running that kind of campaign. So they want to see, show me all the Forgotten Realms adventures. Show me all the Dragonlance adventures. That's what this is for. When you enter an adventure, you're free to say, oh, it's setting neutral. It can be dropped anywhere, or just list other because it's set in some obscure setting that's not listed there. But the goal is not, again, it's not an encyclopedia of every setting ever. It's more of a survey of what do people tend to look for. And people tend to look for adventures set in existing popular settings that they are running. If somebody knows enough about your pet obscure setting to search for it, that means they probably know enough about it to go find the other adventures made for it. Of course, there'll be people in the comments below who are disagreeing with this and freaking out. For instance, Adventure Lookup is just for Dungeons and Dragons stuff. It is not, again, we're trying to make it so that it's a focused experience to get people the content they're looking for, which means if you're a fan of Shadowrun, somebody was complaining that they couldn't add Shadowrun adventures to it, and there's only like 20 adventures for Shadowrun. So if you're playing Shadowrun, you should be able to go find those adventures relatively easily. No role-playing game has the problem Dungeons & Dragons have, where there's literally 40 years, thousands of adventures out there, some of which are really good official adventures, unofficial adventures to sift through. So that's the purpose of Adventure Lookup, is to empower Dungeons & Dragons dungeon masters. Those of you who wish it worked for Star Wars or Dogs in the Vineyard or whatever your favorite RPG is, I'm sorry, but my goal is to make life easier for Dungeons and Dragons dungeon masters. And so that's the goal of Adventure Lookup. You can filter by edition. What edition of D&D is it? And I'm sure there are people who do that, especially if you're super hyper interested in one edition of D&D and you don't play any other, and you find it a pain in the butt to convert content, you can just click a button and filter all the adventures by your favorite edition of D&D. But just so you understand the context, let's talk about what the labels in that field mean. 5th edition is obvious. It's the current edition of the game, but AD&D includes both AD&D and 2nd edition. I didn't think it was necessary to break those two out because the differences between them, while not insignificant, are primarily down to how combat is run and how characters are created. The actual adventures don't change much. We may add a field for skills and powers because if you're a 2nd edition player who loves the skills and powers books, you are probably looking for more adventures that use the skills and powers rules, which they made, but that's sort of an edge case. So AD&D includes 2nd edition D&D. There's Pathfinder. You can filter just based on Pathfinder stuff. 3rd edition, 3.5, and Pathfinder are all different entities in the setting field because there are huge populations of players who prefer one over the other, and they're very picky. And so I want to make sure they each got their own button they can click on to filter stuff by. But if you're somebody who thinks they're all basically the same, you just click on all three. You'll also notice on the list of rule sets that BECMI is one of them. That's the basic edition of Dungeons and Dragons released in the late 70s, early 80s. It ran parallel with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, so they were basically two versions of D&D at the same time. And the basic edition of the game came in a couple of different flavors, including one was called Moldvay Cook, and there was like the companion set, but we tend to lump them all together as basic D&D, and that's what BECMI stands for, because at the time there were different tiers of play. B for basic, E for expert, C for like companion or champion, and then eventually immortal. And these were just tiers of play. There's not really any point in me explaining that stuff to you, because if you are someone who's going to be looking for adventures based on that, you already know all about that. Dungeon Crawl Classics from Goodman Games is both a series of adventures, but also they made their own RPG. So that's going to be a little bit confusing, but that's kind of what this video is for. If it's a Dungeon Crawl Classic adventure that was made for 3rd edition or 4th edition or 5th edition, then they would be under 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition. But if it's one of the adventures they made specifically for their RPG that uses the OSR rules, then it gets its own field. Speaking of the OSR rules, all of the different games, Labyrinth Lord and like Adventure Conqueror King, I think all of those would all be lumped under OSR, the old school Renaissance. They're all basically clones of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I think most of them, it's AD&D except armor class goes up. And then there's some other little tweaks, but they're all modern games that try to get back to that spirit of play from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It's called the old school Renaissance, and they get their own category. Basically, it's Advanced Dungeons and Dragons stuff, but with modern design. You can filter adventures by environment, and there's a specific list of environments. This is something that has to be carefully curated. You can't add an environment to suit your need. You have to pick from the list, and the list is something that I put a lot of thought into because ultimately we need standardized language for this stuff, and people will put all sorts of noodly stuff into this list if we let them that will confuse new users with an undue degree of specificity. So, for instance, people would add adventures to Adventure Lookup, and it would say environment ocean, sea, aquatic, but I actually don't think people look for adventures set in the ocean, just bobbing and floating. They tend to either be looking for adventures set underwater, right? Because their players are going underwater to go, complete a quest or something like that, or on a ship, right? So those are the two legal environments for Adventure Lookup. You can either have something underwater or on a ship. The Underdark is one environment. The desert is an environment. Wilderness covers a lot. So if you're thinking, well, this is set in the hills. Well, how is the hills different from either mountains or wilderness? Pick one of those. People often ask for adventures set in the Feywild because it's a very popular part of 4th edition. I don't know how many adventures like that there are, but that's one of the things you can search for. The trick with the environment list is that it's not a list of every single location or terrain type that an adventure takes place in, because that would be ridiculous. It's based purely on what dungeon masters tend to search for. And people were already adding adventures, and there were some crazy environments in there that I looked at. I'm like, no one is ever going to search for this. Stuff like, I think it should include adventures set in a giant clam. Giant clam adventure. I wrote an adventure set in a giant clam. No, that's ridiculous. So just the type of stuff people tend to search for, not ocean, but ship. Not aquatic, because that's ambiguous, but underwater. We tend to group stuff together in this list. So stronghold includes both a castle, a keep, a tower, because these are interchangeable terms in some cases. And it's not clear to somebody who's a new user coming to this. It's not even clear to me exactly what is the difference between a keep and a castle and a tower. And there are lots of different planes in the cosmology of D&D. But I think generally speaking, people who are searching for extraplanar adventure are either searching for something set in the abyss or the 9 hells, because that's a dramatic place to go have an adventure, or somewhere else in the multiverse, some other plane. So the two categories are Abyss/9 Hells or Extraplanar. And this is basically the catch-all category for everything else. Expedition to the Barrier Peaks is in here, and it was originally listed as being on a spaceship, and that is accurate, but I don't think it's useful for somebody searching because people rarely go, show me all adventures for D&D set on a spaceship. Because there's basically one. There's Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, and it's famous. And if you're wondering what was the name of that adventure set on a spaceship, you should be able to just use the big search field at the top of the page for spaceship, and it will list Expedition to the Barrier Peaks because the description of Expedition to the Barrier Peaks says it's a famous adventure set on a spaceship. That's something you can use the description for. It may be an important part of the adventure. Maybe the entire adventure is set in a wizard's tower. So it's super useful for somebody searching for wizard's towers. But when you go to the environment, it says stronghold, castle, keep, tower. So how is the user going to know? Well, they're going to search for wizard tower, and when you included the adventure, when you entered the adventure, you wrote in the description it's set in a wizard's tower. So the description can do a lot of work for us. You can search based on what kind of items you find in it, and this is really exciting to me and a lot of fun because there are some famous items in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I think Dungeon Masters often don't just want to award these things randomly. They want to know what adventures can these items be found in, because there's a lot of assumptions built into there. There's an assumption that if I find an Ioun stone, for instance, and you can search by that you can search Adventure Lookup for show me every adventure that has Ioun stones in it. The assumption is that the adventure is going to be level appropriate to that magic item. Now, when you're entering adventures into Adventure Lookup, we don't need you to include like trivial consumables, right? Like a potion of healing. No one's going to say, show me every adventure that has a potion of healing in it. That's ridiculous. And we don't include stuff like +1, like magic weapons, a +1 sword, +3 armor, stuff like that, because these things are trivially easy to give away if the Dungeon Master wants to give them away, and they're just not noteworthy. But we do include stuff like a Cloak of Elvenkind, for instance. I don't think there are going to be a lot of Dungeon Masters who search for, like, show me every adventure that has a bag of holding in it, but I think there'll be some. And being able to look at an adventure and see all the items that are in there gives the Dungeon Master a good idea about what kind of rewards this adventure is going to grant the players, and that I think is very useful. So even if you're looking at the list of items and you're like, is anybody ever going to search for all adventures that have a javelin of lightning in them? I don't think so, but it is useful when you're looking at an adventure for another reason to see all the magic items that are in it. Give you a really good idea of what kind of rewards the players are going to get. And I think that is useful. By the way, if you are using Adventure Lookup and you find an adventure that breaks any of these rules, like for instance, you find an adventure that says, oh, there's a +2 great axe in here. And you're like, Matt said that's not significant. You can log in, create an account, log in, and you can flag that adventure. You can submit a change request and say, hey, someone should remove the +2 great axe from this. And people who are good at that will eventually become curators. They'll get promoted to curator and they'll be able to do it themselves. I realize some of these criteria may seem arbitrary, but this is my project. This is something that I have a very specific idea how it should work and what will make it useful. And sometimes it's hard for me to articulate why exactly I think people will look for this, but not look for this. Even if they don't look for this, it's still useful to put it in because, like I said, I've been online now for 20 years watching dungeon masters post on forums asking, does anybody know what adventure this is in, or what adventure is set in this place, or a good early level adventure. That's something else I'd like to be able to do, which we don't have right now. But if you're somebody that can help with database programming, maybe you could volunteer to do it. And that is make it so that people can review adventures, and there can be a list of reviews at the end, and people can give adventures thumbs up or thumbs down. We talked about doing a 5-star rating, but I actually don't think what's the difference between a 4-star and a 5-star, or a 1-star and a 2-star? Let's just let people say thumbs up, thumbs down. And obviously the criteria there is you have run it. If you're just familiar with it and you think, oh, that's a famous adventure I'd like to run someday, that's not thumbs up or thumbs down. We also have a field for boss monsters or villains, and this is something I want to talk about because there's a tendency of people who are entering the adventure to take the name of the boss monster and stick it in that field, and you'll see a lot of that in what's in there right now, but we're going to go through and try to fix that collectively because that is not useful to people. For instance, I have no idea who Alistair Wade is, but he's currently listed in one adventure for the boss monster, and no one's ever going to search for that guy. I think there are a couple of exceptions that we can live with, like Orcus or Strahd von Zarovich, right, where people are going to say, well, what other adventures are this character in? But typically what dungeon masters search for is, I want to find an adventure that has an ancient red dragon as the bad guy, or has a beholder as the villain. And so that's what the boss monster / villain field is for. It's for the species of thing, not the name of the thing. Like there's an adventure called I Tyrant, which is a beholder themed adventure, and somebody entered it. Awesome. Thank you. But they listed the names of the beholder for the bosses. And you got to think backwards. You got to start with thinking, what do people search for? Not what is in the adventure. Because again, not an encyclopedia. Don't just dump all the NPC names in there. That's not useful to people. What they want is they want to know, oh, this is an adventure that has a beholder for the bad guy. The name of the beholder doesn't matter because no one's ever going to search for the name of that beholder because they don't know that's the name of the beholder. If they did, they wouldn't need Adventure Lookup, right? They would have the adventure already. And you can search by monsters, like what monsters appear in here. And that I think is going to be super useful because if you're in a certain part of your world and you're like, there's a bunch of orcs here, show me all adventures that have tons of orcs in them. You know, maybe you think mimics are cool. They are. And you're like, what adventures have mimics in them? You can search and filter by mimics. This is one of those fields, and there's a couple of them. I think items is the other one. Items and monsters are two of those fields where I want, basically everything. I'm saying like except trivial consumables for items and stuff like just +1 axe or, +2 armor. But otherwise, I want a good list of all the detailed stuff in there because when you are looking at the adventure for whatever other reason and you see all the monsters in there, you're like, oh, wow, there's a lot of different kinds of monsters in here. Or conversely, oh, they only really ever fight ogres and trolls in this. And that's not what I'm looking for. Again, when adding an adventure with monsters in it, you got to think about what people search for. Don't bother putting in there that there's an Allosaurus in here because no one's going to search for that. But they will search for dinosaur. So by all means, say there's dinosaurs in here. And it's intelligent search. It knows that a hill giant is also a type of giant and that a red dragon is also a type of dragon and that an ogre and ogres are the same thing. It knows about plurals. Of course, you can search by the length of the adventure. You can say, show me all adventures, because let's imagine, for instance, that you just want something you can run tonight, something like a one-shot. You pick a number of pages like 12. Show me all adventures that are 12 pages or less. And that'll include tons of adventures from Dungeon Magazine, for instance, which were often sometimes only 4 pages long. Great when you're just looking for something to run tonight that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, or is just a site-based encounter where the players are going to be at a temple, and you're like, what's an encounter? What's a cool little adventure I can stick there? You could search by temple and say, say, show me everything that's 4 pages or less and see what you get. Some adventures, old school adventures, will say for, 4 to 6 characters from between first and third level. And that just meant the adventure was suitable for a first level or second level or third level party. It didn't mean, for instance, that if you went in at first level, you would come out at third level. That's tricky because the use of levels changed over the decades that D&D has been around. So that's one of the reasons we also have the range. You can say, show me low level adventures or medium level adventures. And there's not always going to be agreement on what that range is, which is fine because what a low level adventure is different from edition to edition. But I think we can rely on the wisdom of crowds to label all the things that are low-ish level adventures with low. People often ask for solo adventures, so you can filter based purely on that. A lot of adventures come with pre-generated characters on purpose because they want people to be able to play immediately without having to generate characters, because that can take an hour sometimes. And it's not always low-level adventures, by the way, that include pre-generated characters. I remember one of the Mines of Bloodstone series, which I played through, is for levels 18 to 100 and included a whole bunch of 100th level characters so that you could run them and play them without having to play D&D for 4 years before you got to this adventure. So includes pre-generated characters is one of the things you can filter by. There's a lot of dungeon masters out there that like handouts, that like having lots of cool handouts to like props basically to give the players. I remember the Tomb of Horrors had a whole bunch of illustrations to show the players, and it helped not only their imagination, but there'd be visual puzzles, and these were the guides to those things. So you can filter your results based on whether or not the adventure includes handouts. You can also search by whether or not the adventure includes tactical maps, and that's something I want to talk about. Tactical map is a big poster map with a grid on it that you put on the table, and the players can then put their minis on it and you run combat on it. It's a relatively modern adventure. They had some for 3rd edition, tons of them in 4th edition and 5th edition. So you can filter based on that because a lot of dungeon masters like having tactical maps to run battle on. It's kind of a production quality thing. An adventure with tactical maps included in it tends to be a high production value one, and they're fun to use. It's a lot more fun to put out this custom made, like for instance, Keep on the Shadowfell has an epic poster map on it when you fight Caloril the Vile at the bottom of it. It's a lot more visually interesting than just drawing it on, on tactiles. Some adventures are part of a series, and so you can search based on the series, and some adventures are found in an anthology, like a magazine or a book of layers, for instance, and you can search by that, but I think that field is currently badly populated. It says found in, and it includes like Drive-Thru RPG or the DM's Guild, but that's not what that's for. For that, just put a link. There's a URL. Just put a link there. Found in is just a way to help people find the adventure when they're looking for it online, because this adventure might be in Dungeon Magazine number 30, in which case you need to search for that rather than the name of the adventure. Or it's one of the adventures in one of the many book of layers that they published, which are really cool products. But if you don't know that this little encounter, this adventure is part of this larger product, it'll be a lot harder to find. So that's what found in means, is this adventure is included, like Tales of the Yawning Portal, for instance. That's great. This adventure is found in this larger product. It just helps people search for it and find it online. That's Adventure Lookup, folks. It's my hope that it empowers dungeon masters to find the right adventure for them and make their lives easier, make it easier and more fun to run D&D. If it grows in popularity and people use it, we will add more functionality to it. I know there's someone working on a new front end to make it pretty, for instance, and it'd be nice to do stuff, like I said, have reviews, thumbs up, thumbs down, but also like a featured adventure of the week for stuff that the admins have come across that they think is really neat, or a whole bunch of people have added adventures this week. Which are the most interesting of them? I'm sure some of the descriptions I've given for the different fields may seem confusing or contradictory because I'm basically asking you to read my mind, but I have very specific ideas about how I think this should work. And it's just always be keeping in mind, we're trying to aid people based on what they tend to search by. Not necessarily the details of the adventure. It's not an encyclopedia. It's more of a catalog to help people find the adventure they're looking for based on Dungeon Master style criteria, not adventure author details. Please try it out. Search for stuff. Let me know what you think. I've already had people on Twitter, because like I said, I've been talking about this on Twitter for the past couple of months to get some content in there. And people have already used Adventure Lookup and already found adventures that they thought were awesome. So it's already working, and hopefully after this video it'll explode. Please help us add adventures to Adventure Lookup. Look and see, is the adventure you've got already in there? And if it is, maybe it's not complete. Maybe there's more detail in there and you can help add to it or expand it. Currently we're sitting at about 265 adventures, but there are thousands of adventures out there, and some famous ones aren't in the database yet. So please help us grow it and expand it. You'll be helping all dungeon masters have more fun at the table. Once again, thanks to Christian for building this thing. Thanks to Robert Art for helping program the database and get everything working. Thanks to Jerry for managing the whole thing. And thanks to you folks for adding content and using it. Please check it out. Let me know what kind of features you think it should have and how you're using it and whether you think it's useful. Until next time, I think the next video is probably going to be the undead video. Stay tuned. We'll see. Until next time, peace out.